Right, the carbon cycle. So by now you should have completed your cutouts of both the carbon and the nitrogen cycle, and now you should watch this video to check that you have constructed it properly and begin the process of trying to understand it and learn it so that you can answer questions on it and apply the knowledge that you have on such A-level questions. So let's go through the carbon cycle. Now I think the best place to begin is with carbon dioxide in the atmosphere or dissolved in water. Now in the atmosphere, carbon dioxide is at a concentration of about 400 parts per million, or about 0.04%. In water, it's not too dissimilar, it's about 387 parts per million. But basically, there's not a lot of it. And it's not something that can be taken directly by animals. So we have to consume plants that are able to take carbon dioxide from the atmosphere. Now how they do that is a topic that you have studied already, which is photosynthesis, where carbon is fixed, and that takes place in the stroma of the chloroplasts, where the 5-carbon sugar, so this is a good bit of recap for you, where the 5-carbon sugar RUBP fixes carbon dioxide using the enzyme Rubisco, and this goes on to be used to make molecules such as starch and cellulose. And now we have gone from the abiotic component of the ecosystem to the biotic component of the ecosystem. So please make sure that you are familiar with those two terms, abiotic and biotic. Of course, plants respire, and they respire aerobically and anaerobically, but aerobically using mitochondria, where they make ATP, and CO2 is given off in a decarboxylation reaction, in the link reaction and the Krebs cycle. Now how do we now get the carbon? It's quite easily by consuming the plants. So as a result of digestion, we're able to break down those molecules, and animals are able to obtain the organic molecules which are containing carbon. Just like the plants, we will aerobically respire, and in the link reaction and the Krebs cycle, decarboxylation reactions will release CO2, and this CO2 is returned back to the atmosphere, or with aquatic animals, back into the water. Now, all living things will die, and as a result of that, there will be waste products, whether it be by death or simply by excretion, excreting molecules such as urea. And this will form detritus and humus. The difference between detritus and humus is detritus you can class that as the direct dead organic matter. The humus is when the dead organic matter becomes part of the soil, so that's the humus part. This stuff decomposes. It decomposes as a result of the saprotrophs, the bacteria and fungi that will be respiring to obtain their energy, and as a result they produce carbon dioxide, which gets returned to the atmosphere. So please need to emphasize this. These microorganisms have a huge, major role in the carbon cycle, in the ecosystem, in returning the carbon back to the atmosphere. Right, now some animals and plants won't decompose after they died. Some of them become fossilized, which in effect, if you think about it, is actually locking up that carbon, and it's been locked up for millions of years. So the plants and animals become fossils. Some of the fossils we regard as fossil fuels, such as coal, and as a result of human action, much of this carbon, which is in the fossil fuels, by combustion, has also been returned back to the atmosphere. Right, so that's the carbon cycle complete. If we move now on to the nitrogen cycle, again you should have completed your cutout, and so you can use this video to check that you have constructed it properly. And again, listen very carefully and watch very carefully to try and improve your knowledge and understanding of how the nitrogen cycle works as part of the ecosystem. Now, just like in the carbon cycle, I think it's useful to start with the abiotic version of nitrogen, where it's nitrogen in the atmosphere. Nitrogen in the atmosphere is quite a large concentration. 79% of air is nitrogen. It's what a shame we can't use it directly. It's too unreactive, so plants can't use it directly, animals can't use it directly. So it has to be fixed, and for plants to take it up, it has to be fixed into either ammonium ions or nitrate ions. So plants can't do this, but microorganisms can. Now there is a species of bacteria, let's call these rhizobium bacteria, which live in a mutualistic relationship with a certain type of plants called legumes. Now a definition of a legume is a plant that has seeds in a pod. But generally think of legumes as having these little root nodules, and they do have these root nodules. They look like little balls on the root, and this is where the rhizobium bacteria live. Now, in return, the bacteria get anaerobic conditions inside these nodules, where they fix nitrogen, and of course the plants also get their products, which are going to contain nitrogen. So it's a mutualistic relationship. Now the reason why the conditions are anaerobic here is because there is an enzyme produced by the plant called leg hemoglobin. Leg for legume, and hemoglobin, because it's very similar to our hemoglobin in that it absorbs the oxygen, thereby creating anaerobic conditions. The bacteria produce an enzyme called nitrogen reductase, and this is the enzyme that catalyzes the fixation of nitrogen gas, and it fixes the nitrogen gas into ammonium ions, and the plants are able to use these ammonium ions. What the plants are able to do is that they convert the ammonium ions to an amino acid called glutamate. This tends to happen in the shoots of the plant. So the ammonium ions are actually transported in the xylem. So that's something you can add to an exam question if xylem ever came up about what's transported in there. So the ammonium ions are transported in the xylem to the shoots, and they're converted to glutamate, and the glutamate is an amino acid that can actually be converted to many other amino acids. So this is how the plants are able to make all the amino acids to construct their proteins, and that's why nitrogen is so important to making the proteins of a plant. Now, that's not the only way the plants are able to get the nitrogen. Another natural process that occurs is that lightning storms are also able to fix nitrogen. Now they release huge amounts of energy which are able to tear the nitrogen molecules apart, and then the nitrogen atoms react with an oxygen atom to form nitrogen oxide. Now, to give you a bit more detail here, the nitrogen oxide slowly forms nitrogen dioxide. This dissolves into water and therefore falls to the soil in rainwater as nitric acid, and that happens after further oxidation. And nitric acid contains the nitrate ion, which is how the nitrates end up in the soil as a result of nitrogen. I'd like to thank Dr. Hiscox for actually helping me to understand that particular process. Now, from then, the nitrates can directly be taken up by the roots of plants, whether it's a legume or any other plant. So this is how the non-legume plants are able to get their source of nitrogen. They don't have rhizobium in their roots, so they have to take either nitrates or ammonium ions directly up from the soil. Another way that the nitrate concentration can be increased is by chemical processing, something called the Harbour Process or Harbour Process. And what that does is that combines nitrogen in the air with hydrogen atoms to make ammonium ions, and this can go on to be made. This can go on to make ammonium nitrate, which is a common fertilizer, which can be used by gardeners or farmers to apply to the soil and increase the nitrate content. So, as I said, from here you can make nitrate and ammonium ions, and these ammonium ions can also then be directly taken up by plant roots, whether it's legumes or normal plants, and as I said before, converted into amino acids. So how do we now get our source of nitrogen? Well, again, by eating plants, and as a result of digestion, we are able to take these organic molecules containing nitrogen and make our proteins and our nucleic acids as we need them. Now, just like in a carbon cycle, animals and plants die. And when they die, they're going to decompose. Animals also excrete urea. So urea can also be added to the soil. So what we have now here is we have detritus and we have urea. This is basically nitrogen locked up. However, there are lots of soil bacteria which produce an enzyme called urease. So urease is able to break down urea, and as well as the saprotrophs breaking down the detritus, this results in the release from the detritus and from the urea into more ammonium ions, which again that can now be taken directly up by the plant's roots. Now, not all the ammonium ions will get taken up. A lot of the time, the ammonium ions will be further oxidized by a group of bacteria called Nitrosomonas. And I think I've just noticed I've spelt that wrong there. I do apologize. So do check the spelling of that. It's in your textbook. That makes nitrate ions, and nitrite with an I. Nitrite ions can be oxidized by a group of bacteria called Nitrobacter into nitrate ions. So please bear in mind that, or please remember, these are oxidation reactions. Nitrosomus converting ammonium to nitrite, Nitrobacter converting nitrite to nitrate, and this nitrate can now be taken directly up again by the plant root system. This process I've just described there, from ammonium ions to nitrate, is a process called nitrification. There is one further way that the nitrogen can enter the biotic component of this cycle, and that is because there are in the soil what we call free living bacteria, and by that free living, they're not contained within root nodules. There are free living bacteria that are also able to take the nitrogen and fix it so it can be taken up by plant roots. Now, in your textbook, it looks like the bacteria, an example of which is Azotobacter. In the textbook, it looks like it's converting nitrogen straight into detritus, and I don't think that's quite accurate. What you will find out if you read other sources is that they also produce ammonium ions. So I think this arrow which I've just put in brown is more accurate, and I would suggest that you adjust your nitrogen cycle to show that. So the ammonium ions can now be taken up again by the plant root system. Now, as a bit of a side note, it's not all plain sailing. If there's a high concentrations of nitrates, and farmers and king gardeners have to be aware of this, some of the nitrates can leach out. That means the rainwater washes the nitrates in the soil into water bodies, streams, lakes, ponds, and this means that the nitrate concentration of water is unusually high, which encourages the growth of algae, particularly surface algae. Now, this algae photosynthesizes and actually blocks the light from lower down in the water, In return, the plants which are living at the bottom of a water body don't receive enough light. They die. They decompose. The microorganisms decompose and then respire using oxygen. And no plants to release oxygen into water, the oxygen concentration of the water drops, resulting in death of animals. So this can potentially be disastrous for the ecology of a pond, lake, stream, river. And you can sometimes spot this near farmers' fields where the water looks really green, or lots of pondweed or duckweed is grown on top. Farmers are meant to regulate how much nitrates they add, so that this effect is minimalised. But it is a problem. So in some respects, it's quite good not to use too many nitrates. Now, what we haven't got yet is any return of nitrogen to the atmosphere. It's all one way at the moment, from the abiotic component to the biotic component. So how does nitrogen get back into the atmosphere? Well, there's a final group of microorganisms we need to be aware of, which we can term denitrifying bacteria. What they do is that they reduce nitrates to nitrogen gas, and that nitrogen gas is now returned back to the atmosphere. They love anaerobic conditions, and you often get anaerobic conditions when it's been raining, so the soil becomes waterlogged. And this is why sometimes you hear about farmers complaining when it's too dry, and sometimes you hear about farmers complaining when it's too wet. And this is the reason why waterlogged soils are going to be encouraging the denitrifying bacteria, and of course this is going to reduce the nitrate content, and that will cost the farmer more money, either with fewer crops, a lesser crop yield, or the need to add more fertilizer to increase crop production. And this is why sometimes after heavy rainfall through winter season, food prices can actually go up. Right, so that's the nitrogen cycle. Please check that you've got it all correct. Start learning it. Try to remember the order of the microorganisms. Emphasize the role of these microorganisms. They're absolutely crucial for this cycle in the ecosystem.